Okay. let it load all the way, but oh my God, I had forgotten how to do the live thing. Oh, sorry, I'm not trying to be a mess. Okay. Let it show. Okay, I think it's live now. All right, Piali Mohuantin, Keniki Nitstoke. Today we're going to be learning about the past tense root. And you're probably wondering, like, what the hell is the past tense root? The past tense root is basically what you've been learning about the past tense, but it's the root of it. And this class is more like a review of the past tense, but more so that you're able to identify the past tense root. It's pretty easy. But the reason that I really want you to focus on this is because it helps you create adjectives, which are agents, like people who do things. And it also helps you with other tenses of Nahuatl. So even though there are a lot of tenses that are not in the past tense, there are tenses that are in other tenses that they use the past tense root. So you have to be able to identify and be like, okay, this is where I put it. So that's why we're going to focus on that today. Let me share my screen, and then you should be able to see my lecture. Let me move it to the center so I can see it. Okay, so we're going to focus on the past tense root. I know that it's been like classes all about the past tense, but today it's just more about the past tense root. The reason that this also matters is because other varieties use the past tense root as their past tense in general. And so I'm going to show you how that works. And I'm going to show you other ways to use the past tense root. The past tense root is not in and of itself its own tense, I guess. But like I said, some varieties do use it. Okay, this slide was not supposed to be there. This slide is supposed to be deleted. Okay, I'll delete it after the class. So what we're first going to do is we're going to identify the past tense root. So here, usually when I show you these slides, I'm showing you like what the past tense is, but now these are the exact same slides you've been doing, but I'm highlighting the past tense root. So here we have the sentence, Siwat mitzmakak xochitl naman. So if you remember from past, maybe somebody does or doesn't remember, but this is a class 1 verb. So it's Siwat mitzmakak xochitl. Ya kiasik se tet yalguaya, another class 1 verb. Ya mihtotihki yalguaya, she danced yesterday. You see right here is the past tense root. And there's about 6 of these. Ya sanilohki yalguaya. So basically these are slides you've seen in the past, but I'm highlighting the past tense root. Ya kihkohki yoyomit yalguaya. Oh. This one, ya tlacuahki miak yalguaya. All right, so basically, up until now, you've already learned class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4, past tense. And every single one of those classes, they do the past tense differently. And each one of those classes has a different past tense root. So if you remember from class 1 or from previous lectures, class 1 verbs, all you have to do is add the C. So asi becomes asik, kui becomes quick, isa, isak, etc. Basically, you're adding the C. So in those class 1 verbs, you have the verb, you're going to add the C, that makes it the past tense, and the past tense root is going to be the whole thing, the whole verb plus the C. Okay. For class 2 verbs, if you remember, in the Huasteca region, we say ishmati, you're going to drop the first vowel. So ishmati becomes ishmat. And then you're going to add the ki or the ke, depending if it's singular or plural. So ishmati becomes ishmatki, or ishmatke, depending if it's plural. Some of them have a change in the order of the letters and the pronunciation. So you have to go back one lecture if you don't remember these, but there's about 6 or 7 rules for the class 2 verbs. And so basically for HUA verbs, the U and the H flip. And so it becomes kohki, calzacua, the C and the U flip, and it becomes calzahki. Pilla, the Y becomes an X, it becomes pishki. And teki, the QU becomes a C, and it becomes tehki. Tlanesi, the C becomes an S, becomes tlaneski, and nehnemi, the M becomes an N and becomes nehnenki. Now, these rules are very consistent all across the class 2 verbs. So in class 2 verbs, you have the verb, and then you have the past tense of the verb, but the past tense root of this verb is just gonna be the ishmat part, not with the ki. So you're gonna remove the ki and it's gonna become ishmat. That's what we're talking about for class 2 verbs, is the past tense root. Okay, for class 3 verbs, these are all the IA and OA verbs. If you remember, when we put those in the past tense, we had multiple possibilities. We could say machtia becomes machti or machtihki. Okay, so you drop the A becomes an H, and then you may or may not have to add the ki. So you can say machti or machtihki. Either one of those is fine. Adding the ki is a very characteristic sign or something that tells you this is a Huasteca variety, because Huasteca is the one that adds the ki to the past tense. So if you see a ki, it's probably come from Huasteca. So momachtia becomes machtia becomes machtihki or machti, maneshtia, maneshtihki, etc. So basically, what you really need to focus on for the class 3 verbs is that when you put them in the past tense, drop the A, add the ki if you want to, or the ke if it's plural. But the past tense root is going to be the machti with the H attached to it. So the H is included as part of the past tense root. Okay, and then lastly, for class 4 verbs, if you remember, there's only about 4 verbs that are class 4 verbs. Oops, I added an H there. That should not have had the H there. So qua, without the H, I need to remove that H. That qua becomes quahki, so we add the H. Mama becomes mamahki, we add the H. Nawa becomes nawahki, and pa becomes pahki. Let me remove these H's now, it's gonna bother me. Because the verb, we have to add the H in order for it to become the past tense. So go back. Okay, so essentially for the class 4 verbs, you're gonna have the verb, you have the verb qua, put it in the past tense, becomes quahki, and the past tense root is this qua with the H attached to it. Okay. So essentially, if you want to get the overall view of all the classes, you can simplify this rule and basically say for Huasteca region, the past tense root is the verb in the past tense, but without the ki or the ke. So here I give you this example from, I think last week, where we used the verb notza. That verb notza, when you put it in the past tense, it becomes notski. And so you say nite notski. Essentially, by removing the ki, you have the past tense root. The past tense root doesn't include any of the prefixes. It just includes the verb without the ki or the ke. Now, if you kind of think about it for class 1 verbs, the class 1 verbs have that C. You do keep the C. But for most of them, as long as you remove the ki or the ke, you have the past tense root. All right. So now this class is designed to be kind of a review of your past tense, because we went over all the past tenses, class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4, and there's so many rules. So I want to go over it one more time. But in addition to that, I also want you to be able to identify the past tense root. So this exercise is more for you to like think on your feet, hopefully, and be able to create the past tense of a verb, no matter what class it is. And then also tell me what the past tense root is. Okay, so kenihki moilia ikanawat ikatlempanok ninesi. So this is in present tense, ninesi, I appear, pero kenihki moilia ikatlempanok. So first, I want you to tell me what class is it, how would you turn it into the past tense, and then what the past tense root is.
So Ninesi, Nessie would be class 2. So you would drop the I and change the C to a Z. So it becomes Nines.
Uh-huh.
Or Nines. And then for past tense, the You need the root. Is it
Well,
the nes?
it is the, okay, so you got everything except you didn't put the verb in past tense, but pretty much you got the whole thing. So nines by itself doesn't mean, well, you're going to see later kind of does, but for our variety, it doesn't mean the past tense. So nines, you're missing something part. At least for Huasteca Nahuatl, you're missing something. So it is nines, but
Nineski.
nineski. So it's a class 2 verb. So by the way, you're never going to know off the top of your head and all the classes of a verb. You're always going to have to look them up. Now, I personally have run into so many verbs that I pretty much know them. Like, oh, this is a class 2. This because I've done it so much. But when you're beginning, you're not going to know this. And so in some circumstances, you're going to be like, I don't know what Nessie is. So you look it up in the dictionary and it'll say, oh, class 2 verb. And then you're like, okay, I have to apply the class 2 rules to this. So nineski. But if you, once you do this over and over and over again, you know, okay, the past tense of nesi is neski. So you just may not even think about the class. You just know, okay, nineski is the past. But that's just for a lot of practice. So you got nineski, and nes is the past tense root of this verb. Quali. All right. Nimitztlatlania. Nimitztlatlania. So who can guess what class this is? How do you put it in the past tense? Some of these verbs are obvious what class they are, but I'm gonna let you tell me. I'll play the Jeopardy song, and then if nobody answers.
I think it's class 3.
Okay, and how do you know it's a class 3 verb?
Ends in IA.
Quali. So any IA or OA verb, any of them, all of them. This is one of those rules that you don't really break. They are all class 3 verbs. So IA, OA, if you see that, automatically class 3. Okay? So quali. So how are you gonna make this into the past?
Nimitztlatlani or Nimitztlatlaniki.
Quali. Yes, you got it. So nimitztlatlani. So if you choose the first option, which you said, you have to stress this tla louder than any of the other ones, because when you don't have the key, the second to the last syllable is this one. So you would say like this, nimitztlatlani, nimitztlatlani. That would be the loudest. But once you add this key, the second to the last one would be the ni. So then you would pronounce it nimitztlatlanihki. Okay? So whether you add this key or not, it changes which of the syllables you stress, because now it is very regular on the second to the last stress. So it's either nimitztlatlani or nimitztlatlaniki. Quali. And what would be the past tense root of this verb?
Oh, the past tense root?
It's on the screen, but you just have to do something to this.
Is it tlani or tlatlani?
Tlatlani. So without the prefixes and without the key, it's tlatlani. That's the part that you should focus on for the past tense root. Quali. And by the way, the past tense root by itself is not a word, but you need to be able to identify it because we're going to use it for other things. Okay. Tinech nel toca. And by the way, this nimitztlatlania means I ask you. Nimitztlatlania. So nimitztlatlania, I ask you. Nimitztlatlanihki, I asked you. And tlatlani, it doesn't mean anything by itself. All right. Tinech nel toca. You believe me. Tinech nel toca. Now, you may not know what class verb this is. If you don't, you will look it up in a dictionary. Yeah. So I'll give you time to look it up because I know I'm having it in this. I don't remember if I've used this one before.
I happen to have it in front of me, and it's class 1.
Yes, class 1. Okay. So for class 1 verbs, how do you put them into the past tense?
Add a C.
Just add a C. Yep. Well, so all of these, this adding a C is only for singular, and in this case, it is singular. But if it were plural, it would be a QUEH. Okay, quali. So it'd be tinech nel tokak. You believed me. Okay? And in this case, what would be the past tense root of this verb?
Would it be nel tocac?
Nel tocac, just the nel tocac. Quali, you got it. All right. Next one. Ashtichchiwa, ashtichchiwa. You don't do it. Ashtichchiwa. Okay, so I never really told you what class chiwa is, which is to do or to make. But if you look it up, you'll find out what class verb this is. So ashtichchiwa, 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 ashtichchiwa. You don't do it. So how you say you didn't do it?
So this would be class 2 verb.
Class 2 verb, And for class 2 verbs, how do you create the past tense?
To create the past tense, you drop the A, then you switch the U and the H, and then you add the ki.
Quali. And so how do you pronounce the whole thing? So you got it. You got it all right. Quali.
You would pronounce ashtik chiki.
Ashtik chihki. So so a lot of people get, confused with this UH. We don't pronounce the U. And then this H is an aspiration. It's a clear, I mean, at least I hear it. So it's ashtik chihki, ashtik chihki. They would actually pronounce this C as like an H, but they would say ashtik chihki, ashtik chihki. They tend to pronounce this K as a CH, only because when you do it like a hard K, like when you're ashtik chihki, it's kind of easier to say ashtik chihki. It's like lazier, I guess, or easier to say.
Is that for you when you see the double C's?
Yeah, when you see double C's, it's generally that's the previous C or a CQ. That previous C is usually going to be pronounced as an H. So ashtichki, you could say it as tikchiki. It's just harder. And because it's harder, they tend to say ashtichki like that. So that's how you'll actually hear them say it. Okay. Oops. And yeah, and no, when this gets switched, this UH becomes just an H, or we pronounce it as just an H. So you didn't do it would be ashtichki. Quali. And then what would be the past tense root?
Chi.
Yeah, the chi. Yeah, quali. So that's the past tense root, quali, and that's for class 2 verb. This one is tlahtolpatla. Tlahtolpatla. This means to translate a word. Tlahtolpatla. To translate a word. It's from the word tlahtoli and the word patla, to change. So tlahtolpatla means to change a word, or quote unquote to translate a word. Tlahtol, or I guess that is its meaning if you look up tlahtolpatla. So you may not know tlahtolpatla, but you can break it up to tlahtoli and patla. So tlahtolpatla, I don't know if it's in the dictionary or not. It probably is. But you can find out what class this is by looking it up.
Should be class 1.
This is a class 1. And how do you make it a past tense?
You add a C or a K. So
in this case, it's how many people are doing the action?
I think it's just one.
Just one. So he or she translates words basically. So it would be
Tlahtolpatlak.
Tlahtolpatlak. Quali, class 2 verb, Tlahtolpatlak. And then which part of this is, I guess we're going to consider this. Oh, I put the wrong thing. It should not be a class 2. Oops. Class 1. Class 1 verb. And now you know the past tense root. Well, the past tense root is basically the same as for class 1's, the whole verb, basically. Oh, did my screen stop sharing?
Yes.
Demo.
Oh, okay. I knew it. That's weird. The program too is weird. Okay. Except full screen. There we go. Says I like this view better. Past tense root is basically the same exact thing, but with the C. I'll see if we have enough time at the end of the class to do the agents, but if not, we could do it next week because I actually really enjoy it. So a whole class on it, I think is more fun. Okay, michqua.
class 4.
Class 4. How do you know?
The qua.
The qua. Exactly. Now,
And
just
there's
because
only
it
what,
ends in
4?
qua, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a class 4, but there's only, you know that qua by itself meaning to eat, and michqua, you know, miching means fish. So this must come from the verb to eat. Now, there are other verbs, like let's say the verb zacua. Zacua is a whole verb in and of itself. That's a class 2 verb, and it means to close. So just because it ends in qua doesn't necessarily mean it's a class 4, but the fact that it's qua and you know the thing that they're eating is fish, it's obvious that it's about eating. So you would assume this is a class 4 verb. Wally, so how would you create this into the past tense?
You would add the key.
You have the key, but you also need to add something else.
The H. So
The
michquaki.
Michquahki. Michquahki. See, because adding this extra H adds an extra like sound. So if you say michquaki, it doesn't sound as how it should be. It should be michquahki with the qua. Michquahki. And then it sounds as the past tense. Class 4, quali. And then which part would be the past tense root?
Would that be the qua?
The qua with the H. Quali. Oh, I wrote it michqua, but the meh, you could argue that the mich is not necessary there. Okay. So the reason that I brought this up and the reason I really care about this is because other varieties, you're gonna go read other varieties, and the past tense is the thing that changes the most between varieties. And sometimes you're gonna be like, well, wait, I thought the past tense with this key and all this stuff, but other varieties don't always add the key to the past tense, and so you're gonna think it's not the same, but it pretty much is the same. And once you know the rules of the past tense rule, you can create the other past tenses for other varieties, like the Central varieties or the Guerrero varieties. Okay, so essentially, when you have the class 1 verbs, so here I rewrote them, but I put an object, the key, for the ones that require an object. So if you just go look back at the past tense of kiasi, it becomes kiasik. But you will see that in other varieties, like in Central varieties, they're not gonna say kiasik. They're gonna say something like okasik. So, or kasik. So this doesn't look exactly like how we would say it, but it's very similar. And what you'll notice is that Central varieties, they add an O to make it the past tense, and then they use that past tense root that I taught you. Now, kind of ignore the C, because the reason that the C is there is because it makes it sound better. So okiasik doesn't sound that good, but you might actually find some varieties that say okiasik, but okasik is more common. Or just, you might hear them say kasik. And so if you're a Huasteca speaker, you'll be like, but I thought it was kiasik. But other varieties will say kasik, like that. And it does sound a little bit different, and that's why you need to be able to identify it. Or for example, for kikwik, they would say okikwik. Instead of Isaac, well, we would say Isaac, they would say o Isaac or just Isaac. We say kiitak. Maybe this extra I shouldn't be there, maybe, because sometimes they say kitak. So they say kitak or okitak. I might have to remove this I there. That I is bothering me. Hold on. It's because I know how they say it, and the fact that, yeah. Anyways, I'm a weirdo. Leave me alone. Okay, just the I is gonna bother me. Okay. Exit full screen. Yes. So in other words, you might hear them say kitak or okitak. And for maca, we would say kimakak, and they'll say okimakak or just kimakak, which is what we say the same. But okay, you're like, yeah, whatever, Diego, like you're exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating, because class 1 verbs are easy because they all pretty much look the same. But what happens is in class 2 verbs, they do look slightly different, and you might not be able to recognize it right away. So in our variety, we say ki ishmati, or in the past tense, we would say ki ishmatki. But they would remove the ki completely and just leave it with the past tense root. So they would say it like this: okishmat, okishmat. That should not be an extra I there, because they would say it like that, okishmat. They wouldn't add the ki. And notice too, by removing that ki, it also changes the stress of that word. So it used, in our variety, we say kishmatki. The ma is the loudest, kishmatki. But when they remove the ki in other varieties, they stress the second to last. So now it's going to sound like this, okishmat. From kikohki is how we would say it. They would say okiko. So that sounds pretty different. Kaltzahki becomes okaltzak. Kipishki, okipish. Kitehki, okitek. Tlanesti, otlanes. And nehnenkin, o nehnen. And so in all of these examples, I added the O, but the truth is that sometimes the other varieties, they don't add this O. So this O is actually optional. And that's why over here I put it as optional in the class 1, but it's actually optional in all the classes. So even though I added the O's on all of the future examples, I meant to do that, but really this is optional. So instead of saying okishmat, they might just say kishmat or kiko, kaltzak. Kipish, kitek, tlanes, nehnen. So you just need to be aware of this because not all varieties, they don't all speak Huasteca. And so this might trip you up because the past tense is like the most different, I guess. It's not even that different, but it is different enough that you might be like, what? So from kipishki to okipish, or just kipish, etc. Okay? For the class 3 verbs, these are pretty easy for us to identify because it's pretty much the same, but this O is still optional. So we have kimachti. You might hear them say okimachti or just kimachti. See, in our variety, kimachti is completely acceptable. So if you hear kimachti, you're like, yeah, that's the past tense. But they might add the O, so it's say okimachti. Kimaneshti, okimaneshti. Kipalewi, okipalewi. I didn't write Sanilo with an O because Saniloa is more of a classic, a Huasteca word, and I haven't heard other varieties say Sanilo. Just Saniloa is a Huasteca word, so I was like, well, I don't know if they would add the O or not because they don't use this word. They use the word Tlahtoa, and so they would say Tlahto or Otlahto. So that's why I didn't add this O on here because they don't use this word. But anyways, but they do use this verb ihtoa. So they would say, we would say kihtohki or kiihto, and they would say okihto or just kihto. So this kind of change a little. We would say kiili or kiilihki, and they would say okili, okili. All right, and for class 4, same thing. Kikuahki becomes okikwa or Kimamahki becomes okimama, kinawahki okinawa, and kipahki okipa. So basically the reason you need to be able to identify the past tense root is because in some varieties you have to remove that ki to be able to create the past tense in their variety, or at least to maybe you don't say it that way, but you at least can identify it, that it's missing the ki, and that in your variety it's with the ki, and it's basically the same thing. Okay, so here I give you the example with the verb ishmati. So nikishmat or onikishmat, tikishmat, kiishmat or kishmat, or tikishmatke. So in the plural form, they do add the ke. So otikishmatke or ankishmatke. Notice that the I became an A. So in other words, they use an A or an E here. So it might be o enkishmatke or o ankishmatke. In our variety, we'll use the I. And o kishmatke, they knew him. Okay, basically the plural is really easy to identify because in the plural, they add the ke. All varieties add the ke. But when it's singular, they don't add the ki, so that's why you might be thrown off. But don't be thrown off, it's the exact same thing. So in summary, in Huasteca Nahuatl, we're gonna keep the si, the ki, and the ke. And in Central Nahuatl or other varieties, they do keep the si, the k in the class 1s and the ke, but they don't use the ki at all. And they might or might not add an O. It's optional. All right, so I am now gonna ask you to convert these phrases, which are Huasteca phrases, into past tense of the Central variety, let's say Central Nahuatl. So you're able to identify the difference, or at least create it. So Nitlapoa. So first you're gonna create it, well, you can think about it in Huasteca way, and then tell me how you would say it in Central Nahuatl in the past tense. When I say Central, this means like Guerrero or closer to the Central Valley, so closer to Mexico City. And I don't know how Puebla does past tense, so I'd have to look it up. But they're all very similar.
So this one,
Mhm.
oh, so this one will be Nimislapoki.
How come there's a meat?
I'm sorry, Nitlapoki.
So that means what is it? Tlenquitos neki. What does Nitlapoki mean?
I read something.
Well, in the past, right? So I
Oh,
read.
I'm sorry, I read something.
Mm-hmm. And then, so you have Nitlapoki, I read. And then how would you convert that into Central Nahuatl? The past tense, how would they say it? And also remember, it changes the stress. So you got Nitlapoki, that's the Huasteca way to do it.
So it would be Otlapoki? No.
No, amo. Otlapoki, well, how did you lose the ni?
Oh, sorry. Nitlapoki.
So whenever the quickest way to do this is to say the Huasteca way and then just take away the ki. And then maybe add the O if you feel like it. So you would say Onitlapo. That's how they would say it. Onitlapo.
Okay.
I read. So what ours would be Nitlapo ki. But you just take away the ki, add the O, Onitlapo. And it also changes the stress. So it becomes Onitlapo. Kuali. Nikowa. I buy it. Nikowa.
Onico.
Onihko. Kena. Onihko. See, that sounds so much different. We would say Nikohki, but this one's Oniko. And you'd be like, what? Oniko? Means I bought it. But that's how they would say it. I bought it. Oniko. ¿Cuál? Titlachilla. So this one might be a little bit more complicated, but you can do it. Tiweli Tichua. You can do it. I believe in you. Ni means nel toquilia. No, that means I believe you. I have to figure out how to say believe in you. Ni means weiyichiwa. I adore you. Ni means weiyichiwa. Yeah, weiyichiwa could also mean I am proud of you. Okay, ni means weiyichia. Chiwa. I'm proud of you. Okay, but anyways, titlachilla. So let's think about it in Huasteca. How would you convert this into the past? So this is a what class verb, the tlachilla?
I think it's a class 2.
Kena, this one's a class 2. So for class 2 verbs, when you put them in the past tense, you gotta first
remove the last vowel, change the Y to an X.
Yes. So in Huasteca, this would be?
In Huasteca, it would be Titlachiashki.
Titlachishki.
Titlachishki. Forgot that to remove that A. So then
remove the A.
So then Otitlachish.
Otitlachish. That would be the central way. Otitlachish. You watched. Otitlachish. But it sounds pretty different from titlachishki. But it's the same exact word. Otitlachish. ¿Cuál? Mocamatzacua. He or she shuts up. Mocamatzacua. He or she shuts up. So this, yeah. I'm trying to not make them these hard, but it's kind of does look hard. There's also another thing that I didn't explain to you, but this one doesn't cause a conflict, but know that the reflexive in other varieties is not always mo. In our variety, it's always mo. Like I would say here, ni mocamatzacua, I shut up. Ni mocamatzacua, I shut up. Or ti mocamatzacua, you shut up. So we basically have the mo all the time for the reflexive. But other varieties have different reflexives for different tenses. So they would say ti no, ni no camatzacua, ti mo, no, ti, tito? No, not tito. I think it's tito. I could be wrong. I have to look up that one. Ni no camatzacua, tito camatzacua, mo camatzacua, tito camatzacua, an mocamatzacua, and mocamatzacua. Yeah. So, but for our variety, it's always mo. Anyways, that's besides the point. Mocamatzacua is a what class verb? So the verb here is really zacua. Zacua.
I think it's another 2 just based on the sakwa.
And by the way, majority of verbs are class 2. So your best guess is generally class 2. Like it's like 80% are class 2. And here and there's like other classes, but the majority class 2. So this one's class 2, mocamatzacua. So to convert it into the past tense, you're gonna do what first?
Remove the last vowel and then switch the C and the U.
So it becomes mocamatzak. Mocamatzak. And then you're gonna add something for the Huasteca.
For Huasteca, mocamatzaki.
Mocamatzaki. And if you want to make it Central Nahuatl, it would become
O mocamatzak.
O mocamatzak. So you see how much a little quite different it sounds like, but it's mocamatzaki. But say o mocamatzak. O mocamatzak. The ma would be the loudest there. O mocamatzak. Quali? Tiquiza. And this, notice this tiquiza has an H at the end. Tiquiza. So let's do the Huasteca way to do the past tense. So first, what does this mean? Tiquiza. Tlenquito sneki. Or maybe you don't know. If not, look it up. All right. So this tiquiza means to come out or to leave. So tiquiza means we left or we leave or we come out. Okay. So this verb is a what class verb?
Class 2?
Kena. Play the odds, play the odds. Play the odds. Class 2. Quali. And then so what are you gonna do with the what are you gonna do in the first step to put in past?
Oh, you're gonna drop the vowel, and then because there's an H at the end, that means it's a plural. So you add the que.
You add the que. So in our variety, it would be tiquisque.
Tiquisque.
And to make it central, it would be o tiquisque. So they do always add the que because that's how they distinguish between singular and plural the same way. But then they may or may not write the o. So they might just say, like we would say tiquisque, but they would say o tiquisque. So it's very similar. Or they might just say tiquisque. So we agree on that one. Tiquisque. So o tiquisque or tiquisque. Either one is fine. Quali, planesi. Oh, planesi. So for day to break, or in Spanish, amanecer. Planesi. This would be a great name. Planesi, amanecer. Because it's easy, it's short, and it means something cool. If I ever have kids, probably not going to happen though. Anyways, Planesi.
Class 2?
Class 2, you got it. So what are you going to do with the this verb to change it to the past tense?
Remove the I
And the C becomes a?
Q. No, Z.
A Z or an S sound, yeah? So how would you say it in the past tense?
Planeski.
Planeski. All right. So how would you say, so that means yesterday day broke, tlaneski. But what about, you want to change it to Central Nahuatl, or how would they say it?
Otlanes?
Otlanes. And by the way, I say this because it's fairly common to run into these forms. So I don't want you to like be like, oh my God, it's so different. It's not. You can figure this out. Quali. Tlami. Oh, I believe this is my last example for this part. Tlami. So this verb is tlami by itself, but this one is tlami with an H. So class, or how would you say this in the past? Oh, take a leap that you figured this out. All right, so this is a class 2 verb. So this is one where you're gonna switch the M and turn it into something.
Turn it into an N and it becomes tlanque?
Tlanque. And already it would be tlanque. In Central, they would accept tlanque too. And otlanque would be another acceptable answer. So tlanque or tlanque. Quali. Okay, the reason, well, I already showed you one way you could use the past tense root, and that is being able to identify or / create the central way of saying the past tense, which is one of the biggest differences in terms of like the Nahuatl. That's like the biggest difference, I would say, between Central and Huasteca Nahuatl. But if you look at it, it's not that difficult or different. And native speakers can understand both pretty much. But there are other uses for this past tense root. And the first example I'm gonna give you is, for example, you might remember this from the past. I told you ya mis totia, and then I said ya se mis totisket. So over here, she dances, ya mis totia, but over here I have ya se mis totisket. She's a dancer, okay? Mis totisket. So notice the past tense root is what we're actually using, and then we're adding this get. So anytime any of these, well, you'll see. Saniloa, to speak, she speaks, ya Saniloa. And then to say a speaker, you would say, ya se Sanilohket. And again, we're using the past tense root and then adding this get, ya se Sanilohket. So if you remember, probably maybe like, I don't think it was like season 2, episode like 17. I forget what episode, but the episode on agents, I actually taught you how to do this. This was a while ago. And at that time I was like, yo, don't worry about it. I'm gonna teach you later. Well, we're probably gonna have another session next week and we'll get creative with the agents. But essentially the overall rule is you're gonna use the past tense root and then you're gonna add the get to make it the singular form of the agent. So temachtia means he or she teaches people, and temachtisket means a person who teaches people. So this would be teacher. So from he or she teaches to teacher, okay? So you're using the past tense root. So you see this H is in there. So temachtisket, quali. Okay, class 3 verbs. This is what I taught you in the past. Those are the IA, the OA verbs. And so you see we're using the past tense root. Not the past tense, but the past tense root. Class 3 verbs, drop the A, replace with an H, add get. At that time, when I taught you this, I was just like, just add the H and just add the H and add get to it and you'll be fine. And you were fine. But I'm giving him the more general rule. So at that time, I had also told you, hey, walker, to walk is nehnemi, but if you want to say a walker, you would say nehnenket. And see, now you know where this nehnen comes from because this is a class 2 verb. And this class 2 verb, we're using the past tense root of that verb. And so it goes from nehnemi, walk, to nehnenket, walker. So we're using past tense root and then we add the neket, makes it the agent. Okay? So this applies to all the other verbs. So class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4, all the verbs do this pretty much. But at that time, you didn't know what past tense root was. So I was like, I'm not going to get crazy with you. That's a huge explanation. But the reason I care is because you can create all these agents. Now, next week, we're going to play around with like different verbs, different nouns. We're going to create creative phrases of people who do things. So I kind of want to do it next week. That's why I didn't get too crazy here, but pretty much this is the rule. Yeah, I wrote back then, I was like, forming these is more complicated. The past tense will be covered in future lessons. Okay. The other use of this that you may not know yet, and I already uploaded this PDF into the resources section of the class, is this past tense root is used in other tenses. And actually, this is a bad example because the class one doesn't use it, but whatever. That was a bad example. Well, anyways, ignore this class one example because it's actually a pretty bad example. But you'll see later, like if you go onto the class slides, I have the class resources. I added this PDF called Tlamantli Tlachihualisli, which means types of verbs. Tlamantli Tlachihualisli, types of verbs. And go look into that PDF, and I have a whole chart in class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4 that goes through every single verb and every single tense that exists in Nahuatl. Okay, maybe not the tinemi and the ticatka, but those are more complicated. But for the most part, all of these are the possible tenses that exist in Nahuatl. And class 1 is a bad example, but if you go look into class 2, class 3, class 4, you'll see that some of the tenses use the past tense root. If you go look into that PDF, you'll see that I put a star on all of the ones that use the past tense root. So the goal of this class of course number 2 is to cover all of the tenses. And so basically these are all the tenses we're going to cover, plus we're probably also going to cover like combining verbs or whatever. But pretty much these are all the verbs we're going to cover. So if you notice, now it has more complicated tenses like would have worked, would work, will be working, used to work, has worked, have worked. It has all of those complicated tenses. So if you were thinking like, oh my God, I can't express myself with Nahuatl, like how do I say I would have done this? Well, Nahuatl does have a tense for it, but it's just more complicated because you need to know the past tense of root. And here, I did it, this class 1 is a bad example, but I know that this tosquia, the would have worked, it uses the past tense root. Not for class 1, but for all the other ones. So for example, if I want to say, I would have done it with the verb chiwa, which is a class 2 verb, I would say, nik chihtosquia. And if you notice, I didn't say nik chiwa tosquia because that would be using the present tense of chiwa, but I say nik chihtosquia. I'm using the past tense root of that verb to form this tense. So to say I would have done it, I would say nik chihtosquia. So you need to know that in order to create other tenses, and that's why I had to cover it and how to get you good at doing it today. Those are the main uses. There might be other ones, but I can't think of them. So, I hope you learned a lot. I know this class seemed like very grammatical. The point is you have to be able to identify the past tense root, and that's why I'm teaching you this. Okay? Any questions? I'm going to go look in the chat in the YouTube live and also in the Zoom live class. If you have any questions, let me stop sharing. I'm not trying to like overwhelm you with screen sharing is pause. I don't want to overwhelm you. Okay, but with grammar. Okay, no questions in the chat, and let me see if the YouTube live has any questions. Okay, so somebody said panolti. So panolti is another way to say hi. By the way, we use piali, that's the Huasteca way, but panolti is the like Guerrero way to say it, and other varieties say panolti. But panolti, Kenin tinemi, how are you? Yeniya, I have to go. Yeniya, tlapoyowali, oh, good night. I think they mean tlayowali, but they wrote tlapoyowali. Monehki mochipa. Somebody said monehki mochipa. I don't know what they were asking me, but it seems like they're asking, is it necessary all the time? And I don't know, because I wasn't watching the YouTube. So Eric, if you have that question, you could ask me again. But you were asking me if something is necessary all the time. I don't know what you were asking me. Hello, my children and I are so behind, but still working our way through the lessons. Thanks so much for doing this. Tlasokamati, I hope you do learn a lot. My friend who also teaches Nahuatl says, Ni mitzilamiki no yolikni. I miss you, my friend. Kena melawak tlentikitoa. Good, true what you are saying. Okay, so I guess no one really have questions except that one person. But anyway, I consider this class to be somewhat advanced, and I honestly am doing these classes so that there's a progression. The reason I do it this way is because I've had classes where like I just get stuck repeating the same thing, and I want you to progress, and I want you to get better, and I want you to be able to express yourself completely in Nahuatl. And the only way is if you push yourself to get to more complicated Nahuatl. So even though I feel like sometimes people may or may not be behind, I'm gonna make it complex enough so that later on when you watch this, you could be like, oh, I could say more complicated things, because that's really the goal for me, at least. And I know a lot of you requested more vocabulary. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to add stories and just incorporate more vocabulary into the story. So that way you're learning vocabulary. If you go look at the homework for today, you'll see that I have a story and it's in the past tense and it asks you questions about the story, but it also asks you about the past tense, the past tense root. So this I would say this homework is semi-challenging, but I hope you could do it. But if you can't, that's why you got to ask me in the question section of the class. Okay? Any other Tlatlanilistli? No, did I get too crazy on you and you're all like, what? You're absorbing it still? Amo? All right.
We'll get there.
You'll get there. You will get there. I say the best thing is practice speaking. If we want, we could have a class where we just practice asking each other questions. I think we should do that.
Really?
Maybe I'll
We should do that, but maybe not for YouTube.
Okay, we won't record it, but we'll do it.
Okay.
All right. Quali. Timoitase mohanting. Quali shi stokan. Be well.
Pazukamati.
Pazukamati.